My hat kind of crooked. I don't
Yeah,
like
yeah.
that.
And I also think this is an urgent situation that is likely to happen before the election anyway, but at least it's one step in the right
Life
direction.
is crazy, man.
Hey guys, Sunny here, and today's conversation is going to be with a guy I met on Twitter a few months ago. His name is Aaron R. Day, and he is somebody who is a highly thoughtful individual. Recently, he was actually running for the 2024 US election, decided to pivot more into nonprofit and advocacy work, as he is now a fellow at the Brownstone Institute. It's a nonprofit that works to create a more engaged and enlightened citizenry, especially around concepts such as cryptocurrencies, CBDCs, and other sort of government encroaching control mechanisms that people are largely unaware of. He's also an author. He penned a book recently called The Final Countdown, which goes over everything you would need to know about CBDCs or central bank digital currencies. This is the main focus of a lot of his work, as he sees them as a sort of proxy or jump off point for a lot of other levers of government control. If you have any questions, feel free to leave them in the comments below. Again, I'll be leaving some links in the show notes in case you were interested in any of his stuff, whether it's his book, the organization he's working for, or any of the things that he got his hands in nowadays. My name is Sunny, and this is Aaron Day. Oh, so first of all, thank you so much, Aaron, for joining me today.
Oh, thank you for having me.
Absolutely. So, you were in the presidential elect or you were running a presidential campaign. Eventually, you decided that, hey, I'm going to go ahead and take this new route working with a nonprofit called the Brownstone Institute. Can you just take me through that thought process and why you decided that that was the better route for you?
Well, yeah, I decided to run for president for one specific reason, which is to bring awareness of the threat of central bank digital currencies. So to me, this is the biggest single threat to human freedom. Central bank digital currencies are basically a digital form of money that can be controlled, monitored, and censored and programmed by the government. So, in other words, if the government doesn't like what you have to say, they can shut off your money. The government can determine what you can buy, when you can buy it, where you can buy it. That is the threat of CBDCs. And it is the basis of other things like social credit systems, vaccine passports, and digital IDs. So I ran for president not because I thought I was going to win as president. I actually, the original hope that I had was to be able to get onto the debate stage so that I could make people aware of this issue. Because a year ago, 80% of Americans had never even heard of CBDCs. And as I outlined in my book, this is a threat that I think is going to be implemented possibly before the election. So I wanted to bring this out as aggressively as I possibly could, but I got shut out of even the process of trying to qualify for the Republican debates. But in the process, I spoke with many other presidential campaign candidates from the Libertarian Party, Independents, and Republicans. And in fact, Vivek Ramaswamy read my book in June of last year. He and I
Saw
had
that.
several conversations about it, and I think this is one of the reasons that he pushed Donald Trump to come out with his stance against CBDCs. In fact, that was the first thing when exited the presidential race. Is he came to New Hampshire, which is my home state and where I interacted with Vivek, and he encouraged Trump to take that stance. So I think it was helpful, although Trump promising that he won't implement CBDCs is not necessarily a promise that I think that he'll uphold. And I also think this is an urgent situation that is likely to happen before the election anyway, but at least it's one step in the right direction.
Wow. So you are of the mindset that we're accelerating towards some sort of CBDC, some sort of government control apparatus in the next 6 months, would you say? If you were to
I
put a
think it's
number on it.
possible I think it's possible. And the reason I say that is that so President Biden has already signed an executive order. It's the executive order 14067. He signed this in March of 22, March 9th, 2022. That executive order authorizes the exploration of a CBDC, and it also authorizes the regulation of cryptocurrency. So all of this crackdown, excuse me, that we've seen with cryptocurrencies and exchanges, that's part of this executive order. And the technology for a US CBDC has already been developed. People are not aware of this. There have been three pilots of US central bank digital currencies. The most important one for day to day consumers is something called Project Hamilton. It was started in 2022, started in 2020, completed in 2022. And this CBDC can do 1.7 million transactions per second. The technology works, and what they concluded is, we have the technology, we just need to figure out the marketing and the legality. So if the president has signed an executive order and the technology is already there, in my opinion, we're one crisis away from them rolling it out. Because this is where we get
Yeah.
these types of horrible pieces of legislation. They're in emergencies. We got the Patriot Act 45 days after 9/11. We got the TARP Act, which gave billions of dollars to the banks and didn't hold anybody accountable. That was 18 days after Lehman Brothers collapsed. We got the $2.2 trillion CARES Act 16 days after COVID was declared a pandemic on a voice vote. So imagine this, if we get a terrorist attack or a cyber attack, what'll happen is, and it'll get bipartisan support. They'll say, well, cash and cryptocurrency can be used for money laundering and terrorism. So to keep us safe,
Mm.
Republicans and Democrats have to come together and we have to roll out CBDC. Well, now knowing that they have the technology and now knowing that Biden's been kind of pushing this behind the scenes, it seems to me that this is a real possibility that could happen before the election. And knowing that there's a big plan to put this in place over a longer period of time anyway, the threat of Biden losing the election would be a reason to do it before the election, to make sure that this gets in regardless of the outcome of the 2024 election.
Wow. So, what would you say are some of the things that regular folks can do then? Because to me, this seems like a bit over most people's heads in terms of maybe the technology aspect of it, but in terms of where we're going and how these things are going to be rolled out, it seems like a lot of folks just aren't aware. As you said, 80% of folks probably just a few years ago had no idea that this thing, CBDCs, were a viable, reality or potential. And so in terms of things like you've mentioned on your Twitter, things like or on X.com, things like boycotting the US dollar, things like what you call halting World War III, ending tech censorship. What are some of the things that we could practically do, or maybe some of the things that are already being done in order to sort of combat what these forces that seem to be encroaching on us may be?
That's a great question. So my book, which you mentioned, it's called The Final Countdown. I actually outline all of this, what not only what the threat of the CBDC is, but what the solution is. And the solution is to get out of the dollar and move into self-custody. This is important. Self-custody meaning you have in your own possession, not in a bank or through an exchange or some other third party, self-custody, crypto, gold, and silver, and to start using crypto, gold, and silver in a parallel economy as cash. So in other words, start buying and selling things between ourselves using these alternatives so that we're not reliant on the dollar, because it's the dollar that is going to get forced to be converted into CBDC. The dollar is in the process of collapsing anyway. The dollar, every fiat currency in human history, every currency backed by nothing but government force, that's basically just an IOU by the government. Every fiat currency in human history has failed without exception. It has a 0% success rate. Guy did an analysis of 775 fiat currencies, and he found they all fail, and the average fiat currency only lasts 27 years. And he lists 7 main
Mm.
reasons that a fiat currency collapses. And if you look at the dollar, we are blinking bright red on all 7 of those. So it's excessive, mismanagement of debt, extensive war, corruption, um, competition from technology, which is what cryptocurrency is, other competition from other states like BRICS, inflation. So the dollar is at the final stages anyway, and in fact, the dollar's lost 98% of its value. So I encourage people to get out of the dollar and start using these things so that when they try to force us to take CBDC in an emergency, we're unaffected because we're already going about our business of buying and selling and trading with people without the need for the dollar or CBDC. So to me, that is the number one thing that we can do. And it's not that hard to do, actually. It's fairly easy to do. People just need to be aware of it. There's a lot of confusion with crypto. I'm actually going across the country. It's going to be in May is my first workshop that I'm doing. I'm doing 4-hour workshops. At the end of the workshop, all of the participants will walk away with a self-custody crypto wallet and gold and silver in their physical possession, just to get them absolutely jump started, to make sure that, they're just not learning about it, they're actually starting to do it and take control of their own monetary future.
I love that. Is there anywhere that folks can find information about that? You said it's going to be in May. Is that something that you is going to be publicized on your channels?
It'll be publicized everywhere. We're finalizing the location. It's actually going to be on the West Coast. The first one is going to be probably in the Silicon Valley area, but I'm also scheduling them out for the rest of the year. So my goal is to do one a month, and then I'm going to make an online course available. But I want, whenever I can, the in-person experience is the best. But I'm not going to be able to obviously meet with a million people or whatever it was going to take to make this happen. So at some point, I'm going to make an online version available as well. But I want to work out all of the kinks and make sure I've addressed and can answer everybody's questions in as clear as possible way, because there's a lot of material in here. I mean, you have to understand the threat, what's motivating all of this, the CBDCs, and then you have to understand how crypto works and gold and silver. And there's so much information to go through that I want to make sure I get it down in a very clear and concise way.
I understand. I feel that. That's a really important work that you're doing. And you mentioned before we went live this idea of radical non-compliance, which to me it has echoes of that concept of civil disobedience, of being prepared to say no in the face of encroaching, whatever you would want to call it. And I think that in this day and age, people are almost they've been put through the ringer to where they don't even know what to oppose or what to go for. In Nigeria, they tried to roll out a similar program last year called the e-Naira, and it failed. And one of the reasons that it failed was because people weren't adopting it. And so, in the face of that sort of potential, if there is something like hyperinflation that strikes the dollar, do you think this is still something that's feasible? Do you think they can implement it, or is it something that people are going to kind of get a whiff of, oh, this doesn't jive, and I'm going to go ahead and go with this instead, or something like that? Or is it something that you see is inevitable?
Well, so this is the scary part about this as well, because the biggest concern that I have and the biggest obstacle I have is people are like, oh, that's way off in the future. In 2020, there were 35 countries at the research stage just investigating CBDCs. Today, there are 130 countries exploring CBDCs. 12
Mm.
countries have already implemented CBDCs. China has implemented CBDCs. There are 1.3 billion CBDC accounts globally. There are more CBDC accounts than crypto accounts.
Wow.
All of the G20 nations are doing this. And by the way, this ties into a larger move towards one global government. The
Mm.
end goal of all of this is to have a world where it's a technocracy, where elites pick scientists and engineers to tell us how to live our lives, basically under a social credit system. And even if you take the best case scenario, which is that they're doing this because they think that they're going to help people, they're certainly not. That's not how it works. This kind of
Mm.
top-down thing eliminates creativity, invention, and the ability to explore the unknown. So this has been tried before. China's done it. We know it doesn't work, and now they're trying to do it on a scale that's global with technology. The situation in Nigeria, you're right, was a good one, in the sense that it failed. But I dug into this a little bit more, because I was actually on a Twitter space with some people from Nigeria, and they're like, Aaron, why are we implementing this here? Nobody in Nigeria asked for a CBDC. No
Mm.
one. The citizens were not walking around saying, you know what we need is a CBDC. Just like with many agricultural programs and other things, it's the World Bank and it's the IMF that basically pushed with strings a CBDC on Nigeria. And I mean, I think to the extent nations can try to resist and push up against all of those, the UN and everything else, because they do not have good intent. Those organizations are not trying to make Africa sustainable. They're not trying to make any developing nations. It's a land grab to steal the property and to force their will on these countries and on the people in those countries. The problem is Nigeria is the head of the central bank was involved in fraud. So it failed for two reasons. One was technical, and the other was a corruption aspect. And I believe he's still in prison. But But yeah, no, it got violent, and because people couldn't withdraw, they didn't market it properly, and then all of a sudden people couldn't get cash out of an ATM. Um, Here though, people are already not using cash. People are already using debit cards. They're using Venmo. They're using
Right.
PayPal, and so they put the shift to digital payments is something that it's not going to be a difficult transition. In fact, you move to CBDC, it might be at first undetectable to you just because you're still going about your way. In fact, the only difference is, I mean, if you're using your credit card and everything else, the only difference is that the government can monitor and program and see all of your transactions at first. So that's the scarier part about this. But China has rolled this out. I don't know if it's to the entire country. It was 260 million wallets at the beginning of last year, and they were rolling it out to the rest, and it's tied into their social credit system. And I bring that up only to say that it obviously can happen at scale. So you could roll something like this out at a country the size of the United States. And um, so we need to wake people up. To me, people complied too much with the COVID tyranny, and so that was a little bit disappointing. If people were willing to do, and put things into their body and everything else, how difficult is going to be. And they'll entice you. They'll say, well, we'll give you 1.3 digital bucks for every dollar that you have in the bank. They'll start out that way. And then if that doesn't work, they'll just go, they actually might not even do that. They'll probably just jump to an emergency, and people will just take it if they don't have an alternative. Because this whole model of problem, reaction, solution, a problem is created, whether it's manufactured by the government or it's a legitimate problem that exists. People react with fear, and then they already have a solution pre-made. We can't stop the problem. We can't stop the reaction. The only thing we can do is have an alternative solution. And so, but we can have an alternative solution, and that's what I think we can do with crypto, gold, and silver in this case.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for the information. This is really good stuff. I feel like some of the things that we are up against, it seems like I'm a Christian, so it's like this idea of the battle is like not against flesh and blood, but it's against these principalities, against these rulers. There's this sense that we can't see the enemy that we're fighting, and so sometimes that leaves folks in a state of despair or despondence or learned helplessness. Having people who, like you, are getting the message out, getting the word out, and saying there are alternatives, I think is a really good step in terms of how we get to that next step of saying, okay, we all are in agreement now that CBDCs aren't what we want. And we need to start getting these self custody wallets up and running. We need to start doing things with regard to just owning our own, whatever it might be, getting a plot of land and getting some chickens, wherever it might be, getting to a place where we are able to govern ourselves. My own understanding of these things, I think back in 2017 was when I really began to understand that there's something else going on. And then obviously when everything happened with COVID and that accelerated, it became more obvious. But it seems like this is like a multi-front battle. It doesn't seem like it's just, the CBDCs. And as you said, maybe that's like a precursor for things like social credit scores. In terms of the grander fight or the grander issue, do you still see Bitcoin, gold, silver as the most important thing that people should be doing in this moment in terms of trying to get out of this government system?
Well, in my book, I actually outline the whole history of this. Well, not the whole history, but this technocracy movement. There has been a movement. This term technocracy was coined in 1919, but there was a movement that started in 1930 to create a top-down approach to running all of society with scientists and engineers. And in fact, at the time, they even talked about changing the economy from being a system based on price to being on energy credits. So a one world digital currency will actually probably be backed by energy credits. The reason that I focus on CBDCs is simply that once it's implemented, we will basically lose the ability to protest and resist, because if people were willing to comply with tyranny before, the compliance rate is going to be that much higher if they can just shut off your money. So we're going to lose our ability to fight because they're literally going to have control over our financial resources. But the CBDCs are just one part of it, but it's the control system. But there's a really interesting thing. So I live in the state of New Hampshire. In fact, I'm part of a group called the Free State Project. The goal is to get 20,000 Liberty people to New Hampshire to make New Hampshire the destination spot, the beacon for liberty on earth. I was even the chair of the organization. And so we are the freest state in the country. But even still, what we're up against is a force that wants one world global government. You can't coexist with a movement that wants to regulate all of the air, all of the land, all of the sea, all of human behavior from the top down. So we actually have to defeat the global thing while simultaneously figuring out what we're going to do amongst ourselves and what we think is better, a better alternative moving forward. We can't coexist with people that want to enslave us digitally through surveillance and all of this technology. So this is why I laser focused in on this issue, because I realized that if we didn't stop this, we're going to be defenseless. And personally, I got involved in crypto in 2012. I exited the dollar in 2019. So I have personally been living off of crypto, gold, and silver since 2019. And I know other people in New Hampshire are doing this. This isn't popular by any means, and it's not easy either. But I did it because I saw what was going on here. So it is possible, but if we don't stop this, then yeah, they already have plans for everything else. And if you want to understand what it looks like, look at the UN 17 Sustainable Development Goals.
Yeah.
Those 17 Sustainable Development Goals, they include regulating the land, the air, the sea, where you're going to live, where you're going to work, your healthcare, your education, all of it. And in my book, I took each of those Sustainable Development Goals and I said, well, if I wanted to run this from the top down, what would I measure? And what behaviors would I punish or reward if I were using this as a social credit system? And when you go through that exercise, it looks a lot like what China looks like now. So in my opinion, the 17 Sustainable Development Goals are the blueprint for a social credit system, for a global social credit system.
Hmm.
So while there are other things that we can do, if we shut down their ability to control our money, then that derails all of their plans. But that only buys us time to figure out what we're going to do next. This just stops a threat. It doesn't create a new solution. Now, I just gave a talk a week or so, or actually 2 weeks ago. I mean, I think we need to talk about, America 2.0 or governance 2.0, even if it's in the context of America, from first principles.
Yeah.
Have our first principles changed? Our founding principles was America's broken. So are we broken because our founding principles are broken, or is it because of the way that we implemented those founding principles? We need to have that discussion. I think we've learned some things in 250 years, and I think we've got to go back and just say, and I'm not saying America's bad. I mean, I think at the time, relative to what was going on, it was an innovation. But at some point, you have to say, all right,
You got to iterate.
let's go back to the beginning and let's, like the founders, let's have debates from first principles. What are our key first principles? And because if we don't get that going and have participation and debate in it, then when it comes down to the ultimate problem reaction solution, what they're offering is, and again, it's propaganda, but what they're showing is, oh, this is what a 15-minute city is going to look like. You're going to own nothing and be happy. And it's going to be, and this is how great it's going to be. And it's going to be sustainable for the environment. They're offering something tangible. So when we go through the big switch, for instance, I mean, there's this movie coming out projecting an American Civil War. I think it's called Civil War coming out. When we get to the point where there's something bad going on, they're proposing 15-minute cities. Well, what are we proposing as the alternative? Because we're just mostly sitting here saying, well, we know this existing thing is bad. We're just trying to survive and fight through this other system. We need a positive vision from first principles that we can articulate and get people excited about.
Absolutely. Well, last question, and I do appreciate your time today. You ran in 2016 for Senate. You ran in 2018 as a libertarian for governor. Do you think that there is a political solution, or do you think that this is going to take a bottom-up approach?
I 100% don't think that there's a political solution. And I'll even give you a little bit more background on this. I've actually been close to politics for 30 years. My stepmother started in Republican politics in the early 90s in Florida as a precinct captain in Broward County, Florida. And she worked her way up to being the national committee woman from Florida. Then she became the co-chair of the entire Republican National Committee and then was Trump's ambassador to Costa Rica. So I've seen the political process from the very low level to the very high level. And I've run PACs, I've worked to get people elected, and the political system here is completely broken, and you can't change it, because the elections now are actually determined not by the candidates, they're determined by the parties, by the Republican Party and the Democrat Party, based on their get out the vote campaign and how many people they can get out at the polls. They have databases. When I was running campaigns in New Hampshire for my PAC, I had a database. I had 250 data points on every voter in the state. I knew their magazine subscriptions. I knew where they likely ranked on top 20 issues as to whether they were for it or against it. I have all of this demographic information. The political parties have this. In particular, the Democrats have a huge advantage. When Obama was in place in 2008, he put in place a work kind of a game-changing infrastructure for
Yeah.
this. And the Democrats remain way ahead on this. So they know they can pinpoint exactly, they can target you a very finite message through social media. They could even help try to influence your friends. So on election day, for instance, they'll or during the week of the election, they'll go to nursing homes and they'll just say, hey, listen, they'll use scare tactics and say, unless you vote for this candidate, you're going to be forced out on the street and you're going to die. Most voters are apathetic and don't have information about what's going on. 2/3 of Americans can't identify the three branches of government. This is a reality. And actually, when you go back to these founding principles, civic virtue was a founding ideal, was that you would have citizens that were knowledgeable and engaged. That ship has sailed. So already most voters don't even understand the basics of government, and they're basically being targeted from the top down through these parties using big data and AI. So from that perspective, this is why. I mean, here we are. We went through, the Trump lockdowns and everything else, and then we got Biden. So it's not been a great stretch, right? I like, at least from my perspective. So
No.
now here we are. Just today, it's confirmed Trump versus Biden, right? In 2022, 100% of incumbent U.S. senators won re-election. 94.5% of members of the House Republicans, or not the House Republicans, 94.5% of representatives won re-election. So when you want to talk about, is there going to be political change? From where we are right now, it's guaranteed to be about 97% the same as it was before, based on literally who the candidates are. So no, I believe that the system is irreparably broken, but I believe we have the personal power to change our own lives. Like every day, every decision we make, with every breath that we take, everything that we do in our own lives, what we eat, whether we try to use, what currency that we want to use, what we buy, how we shop. Boycotts work. We've seen how boycotts can be effective. I haven't seen voting work, and I've been involved, and this is somebody that was a political activist for a long time. I haven't seen it work, but knowing how corrupted the system is and how it's structured, the amount of effort that it would take to change it, nobody has the resources or the time to make that possible. So we have to focus on local change, and the most local change of all is with ourselves and our own behavior.
Man, well, once again, thank you so much. This has been Aaron Day. He is the author of The Final Countdown. If you haven't, please go and check that out. I'll leave it in the show notes below. He's also a fellow at the Brownstone Institute. Is there anything else that you'd want to share with folks today, just as a parting words or a message that can maybe help folks get a sense of where we're headed and what we're in?
Well, I'd say one thing, in this political process as it relates to CBDCs. So, I mean, I ran for president, but part of this was talking to other politicians. So I talked to Senator Ted Cruz from Texas, and he's put a bill up forward twice to try to ban CBDCs in the Senate. And in fact, his concern is that the Federal Reserve is going to act unilaterally without Congress. So his bill is to stop the Federal Reserve from acting unilaterally. But he told me his bill is dead in the water. He said that the votes aren't there. The Senate is not knowledgeable on these issues, and they're not focused on these issues, and that it's likely that Elizabeth Warren is going to be the new head of the Finance Committee next term, and she has been publicly talking about CBDCs. So I want to stress the urgency of the fact that the technology is developed, that the politicians at the highest level in the United States are pushing it, other countries are pushing it, and it's in the context of a 50-year agenda to move towards a one world global government. And that you have to, those things tend to sound conspiracy theory-ish, but they're not. They're in the documents of these organizations themselves. They're in videos. in their own words. So we're in the bottom of the ninth inning of a baseball game where the goal of the game is to move to this one world government, and most people don't even know we're playing a game. So I would say take the urgency of this seriously, and in particular focus on this threat with CBDCs, because you can do something about it directly. You can do something today. Calling your congressman won't do anything, but going to your bank account and buying gold, silver, or crypto, you can do that right now. That will actually have an impact, and it'll take you like 5 minutes.
Absolutely. Well, thank you once again, Aaron Day. Appreciate your time. Again, this has been Sunny, and we're going to go ahead and cut this off for today. But this is something that you should definitely be thinking about in terms of where we're headed as a collective, what we're trying to do, understanding that politics may not be the way. We need to start thinking about things from first principles, self rule, how we're going to help each other. And that starts with us recognizing the playing field that we're on and moving towards a better future. So, once again, thank you, Aaron Day. Have a beautiful rest of your day.
Thank you.
Bless. You know that life is a test. They can incessantly incentivize the best of the best. But when assassins created credit from a nation of debt, the dark petroleum results in pandemonium. Bet.